Hey everybody, welcome back to Barrack Saga. Today we're going to be moving on from the ghastly chapter 9 and starting in on chapter 10. So things have been getting pretty rough for this run. In the last main chapter we faced off against lancers, which were very scary, and in this upcoming main mission we are going to be dealing with ballistae properly for the first time, which are also extremely terrifying. But I think the most troubling part of my situation at this point in the run is actually my money situation, because that's not nearly as good as I would like it to be. So I'm selling off quite a few extra things that I feel like I don't need anymore at this point. It doesn't come out to all that much really, even though it looks like a fair bit. We have an awful lot of expenditures in order to make the upcoming map as easy as possible. And to start with that, we obviously have to rehire a couple of our mercenaries, specifically Clifford, because Clifford is really strong, and he's also really expensive. Similarly to the last map, there are 3 civilian requests again on this map, and I am going to be completely ignoring 2 of them. And this is going to continue to happen for as long as the game sees fit to require some of my really weak untrained units to be deployed. Specifically for this map, that would be Christine and Leon, but I really cannot afford to spend my deployment slots on either of them because they're pretty much complete liabilities at this point. I do have to hire a couple of mercenaries though. Owen and Percival are both coming to this map. And the fact that I'm deploying a healer should tell you how rough this upcoming battle is. Moving on to the Kingfisher Pavilion, most of my units are going to be eating beef bourguignon here, which gives plus 10 HP, as well as a health recovery if the dish is liked. This allows me to buffer the bulk of some of my stronger combat units. Sylvis, however, is going to be getting the chicken stew, which finally saw fit to show up. This is the one that gives 1.5 times experience points, and Sylvis obviously still hasn't quite reached level 10. So this is my last-ditch attempt to get her there, and it does in fact work out. And then, of course, we have to go shopping. And this is where most of my money expenditure is actually going, because I need some really strong weapons to allow me to keep up with the increasing strength of the enemies. I'm going to be picking up a bit of pretty much everything, just excluding magic, and the first recipient of my generosity is going to be Sylvis. She is going to be receiving a Chukonu. Now, I know I have a brave crossbow lying around somewhere, but 4 attacks are definitely better than 2, and I feel like the Chukonu is going to allow Sylvis to take some kills that she would miss with only a brave crossbow. Next up, I saw how destructive the lancers were in the last map, and I decided that I wanted a piece of that action. So Clifford, who is my only unit able to use lances at this point, is going to be getting an iron lance. He's also got the habit of breaking his shield, so he needs a fresh one for this upcoming chapter. And to round it out, I am buying a full set of lady gear, both a sword and a shield, because these are extremely powerful and light, and so they're definitely going to be worth the investment. And with all that money dumping out of the way, you can now see why I felt that my finances were in such dire straits, because I'm barely confident that I'm going to be able to hire Clifford again in the next chapter, let alone anyone else, so permanently recruiting him is top priority here. Obviously, I also want to be sure that all of my healing items are on units who are actually going to be deployed, rather than units who are hitting the bench. So that's the principal part of my inventory management here. But there's one other little important thing that's coming up, and that is Percival receiving the Miracle Charm. I used up one of my Miracle Charms on Volo in the last map, and that proved to be really helpful. So once again, I'm bringing a Miracle Charm in to kind of help my reliability problems. Miracle Charms in this game are pretty much the exact type of thing that I tend to hoard, but this game is difficult enough at this point that I feel like I really need to use the tools that it is giving me. Now, obviously I have several bags full of materials that I could also sell, but I want to save those until it's absolutely certain that I'm not going to be able to use them to create the superior equipment that can possibly come from the atelier. So now, onto the map. While I didn't find this map as horrendously awful as Chapter 9, it's still a very challenging map. And the reason for this is right at the start. There is a choke point covered by 3 pretty tough enemies. And to be honest, when I first started up this map, I took one look at that and went, nope, and just refused to play the game. But after going away and having a bit of a brain break, I managed to come up with a decent strategy for getting through them, and that is what we are going to see shortly. The first move I always make is sending Laurentia over to attack Yalong, the archer at the back. There's a chance that she might get a critical hit and just kill him, and that's ideal, but it's also fine if we don't. So he has the Deadeye skill, which allows him to chip at Laurentia after she cantos away, but Owen has a free turn that I really have no alternative use for, and so she's pretty easily healed back up to full. Yalong being damaged also means that the Raise Priest behind the wall decides to heal him pretty quickly, and that's important because I don't want that guy healing anyone else, as we'll see shortly. And this also doesn't quite heal Yalong back to full, which means that he is actually in range of being one-rounded from there. But here's what I was talking about. In order to break through this choke point, which has some very defensive enemies with shield fair and powerful shields, I needed to find ways to get around that. And the way I decided to do was Percival with Dire Thunder, who deals a huge chunk of damage to this first guy. Reese is then able to move in and finish the job using the Kolishmarkt, but attacking him directly would put Reese in range of the enemy Lance Knights, which are absolutely terrifying and would destroy him if he stayed there. So Reese needs to canto back after taking the kill in order to not die here. Instead, we need someone much bulkier to bait the Lance Knights out, and that is obviously going to be Clifford. Now with the Night Sword, Clifford would cleanly one-round KO Yalong from 34 HP, which is what he had, but unfortunately he whiffed his second hit. In the end though, this turned out to not be a complete deal breaker. Clifford's positioning after fighting Yalong is also crucially important because it manipulates the Lance Knights into behaving the way that I want them to. It is extremely dangerous to have the Lance Knights running around while my squishier units are trying to advance, and so Clifford's positioning means that one of them gets forced into the range of Sherpa, and Sherpa is quite happy to walk up to him and one-round KO him with the Brim Ranger. This manipulation was the breakthrough that allowed me to solve the first part of this map, in my view, because getting one of these Lance Knights killed on the first turn means that the threat is almost entirely ameliorated for the subsequent turns. It's much easier to kill off one remaining Lance Knight who's trying to run away than it is to kill both of them in that situation. The remaining melee enemy here, Murin, has the counter skill, so Ward is not actually going to be attacking him here. My older strategies tended to involve Sherpa coming in and fighting him, and that led to Sherpa taking a big counterattack and generally being extremely vulnerable to death afterwards, so this is a much better plan. So now I would like to draw your attention to the biggest, most fearsome threat in the entire map, and that is the Ballista sitting up north. I really need to make sure all of my units skirt his range as much as possible, because those things hit like a truck. And these ballistae are pretty much most of the reason why I have deployed Kramer on this map at all. Kramer has the Arrowbane skill, which forces any hit from an arrow thing, which is ballistae, bows, or crossbows, to be re-rolled with a maximum of 33 listed hit. And that makes Kramer pretty damn good at dodging ballistae, which is really important. Percival also has the Arrowbane skill, but I needed him regardless, so him having that is basically just good luck. But the point is that either of these units can reasonably happily sit in a ballista's range and expect to avoid death. Now, because of Clifford's failure earlier, Yalong is still alive and we do not want him to be, but Reese is able to move in and make use of the Kalishmard, so once again, even without the extra shield breaking effect, the Kalishmard's Brave effect on its own is very helpful in dealing reliably with certain enemies on this map. And that's not even mentioning its 12% crit rate, which is also always great. Reese's positioning after cantoing is actually really important here, because what it does is it baits the Raised Priest into attacking him, because he has no healing targets. And that means that the priest is in a position where Laurentia is then able to move in and attack him, while being able to then canto north outside of the ballista's 3 to 7 range. Now, this would normally just be chipping him, but Laurentia is awesome and actually manages to get a critical hit and one-hit KO the Raised Priest, which means I don't have to worry about enemy healing for the rest of the map. This is the second main mission in a row where Laurentia has one-hit KO'd an annoying enemy healer with a critical hit, so I think she's super awesome for that. Laurentia top tier forever. Now, we have to deal with the other Lance Knight here, and another thing that Reese's positioning has done was allow him to be in position to give Clifford some hit support with his commander skill. Unfortunately, Clifford squandered that by still managing to miss an 84, so the Lance Knight is still on pretty high health, and we're going to have to move in Sherp to deal with him shortly. Despite my hyper-focus on the Lance Knight, we do still have Murin to deal with, the Axe Guard, and as with his pal Danfar earlier, he is going to be chipped down by Percival using Dire Thunder, and then finished off physically later on. More irritating than that is the enemy Bow Knight, who is sitting around, and he also has the aim skill, so he's pretty accurate when he wants to be. And this is yet another reason why I love Arrowbane, because it means Percival can sit in his face more or less safely. Now, Ruby is not going to be the one finishing him off. She is actually more interested in raising her weapon ranks than in getting experience points, so she's going to chip down the enemy Bow Knight. That and the fact that she does not want to take a counterattack from Murin, which she is all but guaranteed to if she had attacked him. Instead, we're going to have Sherpa move up and deal with Murin once and for all, because there's no reason to fear a counterattack when you have a super strong sword that just straight up kills. Due to my middling strategies earlier, Ward has wound up without a horse, and part of the reason for that is evident here. I have also completely failed to equip his shield, and I continue to not equip his shield, which is not ideal, but I guess it worked out, so okay? I did slightly miscalculate here and left Sherpa in range of the ballistician, which is unfortunate and leads to him taking a pretty big hit, but he's a big boy, he can take it, and dealing with Murin was probably more important than keeping Sherpa at full health here. Because he doesn't need HP in order to kill a Lance Knight, because Lances are not able to counterattack. This essentially eliminates the strong threats on this side of the wall, and leaves just the Bow Knight, who is currently attacking Percival. Unfortunately, Percival did not proc his Arrowbane skill, and so instead the Miracle Charm got broken here. But that's okay, because the Miracle Charm, as I mentioned, was there to add reliability over the course of the entire map. So this is pretty much what it's for, and Percival is able to finish the guy off on the counterattack, leaving us completely free to move up to the gateway to the town and start breaking our way through it. Normally Sherpa is on gate breaking duties, and I've already used his action this turn, but because all the enemies have been cleaned up, I have so many units available to deal damage to the gate that it's still going to get busted through this turn in plenty of time. Now, I want to bring up something that I've already touched on, and that is how difficult the game has suddenly started to get. So, beforehand, there were rarely enemy skills that were relevant to combat, but now they seem to be all over the place, as well as scarier enemy weapons and defensive positions, as well as much higher enemy stats that I can no longer just roll over using Clifford. And that is, I feel, really starting to tax my ability to LTC this game. So in the future chapters, I'm going to be leaning a bit more on more reliable strategies rather than trying to strictly turn floor everything. And that really starts in this map, because I'm making a fairly leisurely push towards the goals rather than going headlong through the town. And that's because without the foreknowledge of the game, I have fewer good tools, I feel, than I otherwise could have had at this point in the game. So the gate is broken down, and we are now free to enter the town, which is extremely scary. But Percival is not going to be coming with us through there. Instead, he is heading north up the cliffs, and he is going to keep the focus of the ballista while trying to take it down and thus render it a non-threat. Percival has proven to be a really valuable unit on this map, thanks to the combination of having 2 range and Arrowbane, which is going to allow him to fight the ballistician over the wall. Now, in town, there are some extremely threatening enemies, and they will have the hide skill, so they're invisible until we get close. Most of these enemies have bows or crossbows and Overwatch, which is even more frustrating because it makes it very difficult to rush through the town towards the goals. Specifically, the next goal is to get to the other end of town and break down a second gate. But I will come to that. For now, one of the enemies in the town has come rushing out to attack us, but unfortunately for him, he decided that it was the best plan to go up and try and kill Ward, and Ward proves him wrong by crippling him in a single round of combat, and so that guy must be feeling pretty dumb. But there are some much more threatening enemies waiting for us that we still have to bypass. However, we really do need that space free so I can start entering the town, and so we're going to have to capture this guy with Sylvis. Before doing that, I wanted to clear out her inventory a bit, so she dumps a couple of things onto Sherpa so that she's guaranteed to not have to throw anything away when she goes in for the capture. Now, Sylvis is obviously in dire need of experience points, and she's still a few short of level 10, but there's plenty of other opportunities for her to get kills, because she's one of the few units I have who's actually able to counterattack enemy bow users. Reese has baited in some of the enemies sitting in the middle of the town, and the first one he actually managed to one-round KO thanks to an adept proc and a timely dodge, which was very nice of him. And the second one has also taken a bit of chip thanks to Graham, although Reese did get hit by him. Behind them is another enemy who has been using Battle Cry, and that's, as you know, not particularly nice to deal with, so we need to sort him out somehow. So we want to engage him in combat to get rid of that, and one way to do that is of course to send someone tanky forwards. For now, Percival has reached the ballistician and started attacking. Unfortunately, he missed one of his attacks, so this ballistician is actually going to live for a surprisingly long time. But that's alright because he's not actually in anyone else's range, and Percival is keeping him distracted enough that he does not turn to face the rest of us. Ward moves in to try and kill this guy. Unfortunately, I still haven't equipped his shield, and he ends up missing and taking a counterattack, which means he's now on low enough health that the battlecry enemy might be able to kill him. So that problem suddenly got a lot more urgent, and my response to it was not particularly great, because I sent Reese in to try and fight him, and instead Reese got ambushed by a brave crossbow enemy, and now Reese is in a slightly precarious position instead. But that cleared up the overwatch, and Clifford is able to move in and attack to get rid of the battle cry instead. However, that was a fairly messy bit of action that I probably could have done better if I'd actually stopped to think through my actions. It's actually somewhat characteristic of this clear overall. It's not the cleanest clear. There's a lot of rushing in and hoping that it'll just work out going on, which I know isn't ideal, and I don't think it's all that much fun to watch because it does lengthen the video, but it's how I managed to get the clear, so there's that. Now, Laurentia is going to move in to try and make up for Ward's mistake by dealing with this guy with her high accuracy lady sword, but she also manages to miss 94, which, you know. Fortunately, she also dodges and does manage to finish him off, but that would have been really embarrassing. Sherpa needs to continue advancing, and to that end he needs to be on full health, so he makes use of his concoction here to go all the way back up to full health. And lastly, before the save point, there's another ballista on this map, and Ruby thankfully dodges, but it would have been so embarrassing to have to redo the first 4 turns just because she got whacked there. Now, in order to get to that ballista, which is now the highest priority target, we do need to move around this town somehow, and that's a problem because of all the enemies with Overwatch sitting in it trying to interrupt us. So we're going to have to do something about that. At the start of turn 5, Vester arrives with a bunch of green units, and they need to fulfill the actual objective of this map, which is that Vester needs to reach the boss, Alvina, and talk to her in order to talk her down, essentially, because she's supposed to be a loyal subject of the duchy that he is the heir to. Reese dodges an enemy here who has a weapon that automatically kills horses, but he gets 1 round KO'd, so who cares? Now, the gate at the other end of the town is a special gate because it has 10 defense for some reason, and that makes it a whole lot more difficult to break through than the regular 0 defense gates that we've been dealing with so far, especially for mere green units. So we're going to have to hustle someone over there to help them out if we want to save some turns. On this turn, most of my units want to withdraw a bit from the ballista range, but ballista range is not the only reason for this, because there is also an enemy here who has deathmatch, and we want him to go for Clifford because Clifford most easily finishes him off in that deathmatch while taking minimal damage. However, it is quite hilarious to let him attack Reese because Reese has Grom, and when Reese is about to die, Grom activates its miracle charm effect. So you just get Grom produced a miracle, Grom produced a miracle, over and over until the end of the combat, which is usually when the deathmatch guy is dead from being crit. And that's just really funny because Grom lasts the whole combat after activating its miracle charm effect. Clifford needs to advance here, and there are several Overwatch enemies in his way, so he has his shield ready to take no damage to allow him to continue walking, but instead, amazingly, he manages to dodge every single attack that got thrown his way, which also allows him to get through and make an attack of his own. The great thing about this is that it means that his almost completely broken shield is still intact to take an additional hit later on. and that's really extremely helpful when it comes up, as you'll see. Rather than advancing further, which you might expect, Clifford instead stays still, and the reason for this is to make sure that neither of the enemies adjacent to him can go back invisible by hiding. He cannot stop them from activating their overwatches though, which is a pain. Then we have Sylvis move in and pick up a kill, and this allows her to reach level 10, which is what she needs in order for her permanent recruitment map to be unlocked. However, there is one additional requirement, and that is for a specific city event to be viewed. And this city event can only appear at the very start of a chapter prior to its main mission, as far as I can tell. And so we're not going to be getting Sylvis's permanent recruitment until sometime during chapter 11, which is a bit annoying because she is another fairly expensive mercenary. We once again have a section where my strategy for dealing with a selection of enemies is not particularly sound or thought through. Firstly, I use my highest move unit to bait out the Overwatch for some reason, with the result that, of course, she gets beaten up. And then I forgot to switch Sherpa to his longsword prior to movement, which means he's stuck with the Brim Ranger that lowers his avoid by a lot. And that makes it vastly more likely that he also gets damaged and stopped, which is in fact what happened. So that's kind of bad strategy there, but Kramer is coming in to help out. Percival switches from Dire Thunder to his regular Thunder in his one-on-one duel with the Ballistician at this point. The reason for this is that, as I mentioned earlier, the Ballista is thoroughly distracted by Percival, and so there's no reason to rush killing it. Clifford now breaks his shield as he advances, but it doesn't matter because he has broken past the Overwatch and he takes no damage, and this allows him to destroy the Ballistician in the center of town, making this area a lot more safe for all of my units to continue their advances. I've spent a fair amount of time praising Kramer so far in this map, and I'm going to do so again because he is a very safe unit in this map. And part of what makes him so awesome is the personal-ish weapon that we got in his join map, the Balmung, which is incredibly accurate and very strong in addition to having a crit rate. He's not quite fast enough, unfortunately, to make a counter-slice attack with the Balmung. It's just that little bit too heavy, but he is able to counter-slice with the Levin sword, which is why he's carrying that around too. So there's one more archer visible, and Sherpa is going to have a crack at him. I eventually settled on Brim Ranger for being a more reliable weapon and hopefully one-rounding, but it didn't turn out that way. So we ended up just chipping that archer instead of killing him, which again is vaguely irritating, but it means that we can tidy up with some of my other units who need experience more than Sherpa anyway. I take a bit of a gamble here by sending Sylvis in to Overwatch range, and this actually pans out because Sylvis casually dodges, of course, and managed to finish the archer off. And that gives her even more experience, which of course she doesn't really need at this point, but I like her as a training project anyway, so I'm going to keep giving her that. You've probably noticed how quickly I am going through Owen's physic, but I think it's really necessary on this map because I need to keep my combat units topped up as much as possible, and there's only so many vulneraries I have. So Owen is also really showing his value here, in my opinion. The town is now almost completely cleared, but there are still a couple of enemies hanging around down there, including a boss, Ishmart, who we're going to have to sort out soon enough. Now, Laurentia has another mission that she's going to head north for, but because she's on low HP, I need to make sure that she's not in danger. And there's a scary Razite boss inside the main fortress. His name is Almarcus, and he is very nasty, so I make sure to check his range before sending Laurentia up there to make sure that she's in no danger of being killed. Almarcus himself we don't have to deal with really on this map. He has a miracle charm and he's going to leave the map on his own at some point, So that's all good. At this point, I'm very indecisive because I kind of want to kill Ishmart with Clifford, but also I feel the need to start breaking down the gate and going towards that actual objective. So eventually I decide to move Reese in order to get a higher hit rate for Clifford against Ishmart. But then the plan goes completely off the rails because an enemy gunner moves in and has a go at Silvus. Silvus, of course, is a queen and she totally dodges that loser, but this has distracted me from my starting plans on this turn, and so we are going to chip down that gunner before turning back to Clifford's turn. Ruby is attacking for extra equipment experience. You'll notice that this particular attack bumps her up to 19 sword rank, and most of the attacks that she has taken during this map have been with the intention of gaining equipment experience rather than regular experience, which is why I've mostly not been giving her kills, or indeed even trying to. Instead, this kill ends up going to Silvus and giving her another level up. Then I turn my attention back towards the gate, and I have Ward rush up and have a go at breaking that down. This actually ends up leading me to change my plans with Clifford completely, so we're going to leave Ishmart completely unscathed at this point, and instead, because Clifford is just strong enough to finish off the strong gate, that's what he is going to do. And this is going to break down this gate 3 full turns before the green units would have managed it on their own. So I am still at least somewhat comfortable referring to this run as an LTC, despite the fact that I'm trying to relax my requirements a bit there. However, now the question becomes, what do I do about Ishmart? If Clifford isn't going to do it, who is? And the answer to that is, of course, good old Sherpa, who is being healed up by Owen here. The next thing I need to do is make sure that I'm not going to be overwatched into oblivion. Kramer probably should have equipped the Levin sword here so he could counter slice, but it turned out that the crossbow guy didn't have Overwatch active, if at all, so Sherpa is free to roll straight over to Ishmart with no worries and kill him off with the Brim Ranger, thus dealing with the last severe magical threat on this map, and giving Sherpa a level up, believe it or not. Now, Laurentia's mission was to move up and start breaking down one of the gates into the final fortress where Alvina is hiding. In my experience, Vester always heads for the northernmost gate, so that is the one that Laurentia is targeting. And of course, after she makes her attack, she is going to canto back out of Almarcus's range. In fact, I chose her positioning very carefully so that she would be able to canto back while still maximizing the amount of extra damage she got from her pre-attack movement with her killer spear. Percival finally manages to finish off the remaining ballistician on this turn, and that means that the scariest enemies on this map are pretty much all dead now. There are only a few more specific enemies that I'm going to be calling out from here on in. So we left that crossbow guy alive next to Sherpa, and that guy manages to land a crit on Sherpa, which is very, very bad. Except Sherpa somehow manages to pull through, and he has counter, so he gets to counterattack 3 times and put some decent damage on the crossbow guy, even though he misses repeatedly, as has happened way too often in the course of this map. So we're going to have Ruby finish him off, and that is going to give her a level up here. And that's great because she only needs 1 more point in each of her weapon skills in order to be ready for promotion. And so, of course, she gets +1 to her sword skill and nothing to her spear skill, while she broke her last spear and has an inventory completely full of swords. Well, that aside, I don't really have the freedom to go back and try and rig a better level in this particular map. So we're just going to have to deal with that and grind up her spear rank later on. Laurentia manages to get a critical hit on the gate here, which is really funny. I'm fairly sure that I had enough time to break down the gate regardless, but having a critical hit to it might have saved some weapon durability, and so once again I'm grateful to Laurentia and her brilliance. Now, there is one more objective that is not the main objective that I still have to do. I mentioned that I was doing one of the 3 civilian requests, and I am not going for that just yet. In order to get this civilian request, we need to visit a specific house in the town, but unfortunately there's another house right next door on which is hiding a very scary enemy, a Chukonu gunner with Raijin arrows. And so I'm obviously going to send Kramer down to deal with that, using his Arrowbane to hopefully dodge everything, but I am not comfortable sending him in to do that without the backup of the turn 10 save point, which is why I'm holding back on that a little bit. The final gate is nearly broken, and I am going through Night Sword durability at a fair clip in this map, but I think it's worth it overall, especially since I still have a backup one on Ward in case this one also ends up breaking. But it's not my units that have the final blow on this gate, it is in fact one of the green units who moves in to open it up. And this sends Almarcus packing, which is great because screw that guy. And so now we have to talk about the units that are inside the final castle. One of these is the boss that's standing next to Alvina, and from here on out he is going to spend every single action using guard on Alvina. And that's absolutely fine because we do not care about Alvina. In fact, we want her to survive. So if that guy wants to spend every turn guarding someone who we're not going to target, that's all for the better. A more annoying enemy in there is an archer who is holding sleep arrows. Fortunately, he put an ally unit to sleep here and not Vester or one of my units, but he's still pretty annoying and he has to go. So we're going to try and deal with him as quickly as we can. Finally, there is a armor guy called Pratten, and he has some very curious AI and skills. In particular, he has the Mercy skill, which he will generally use when he attacks us, and that means that we have very little to fear from him in theory. However, he also has the Pulverize skill, and he will also use this on certain occasions, such as if you are casual enough to leave Reese standing right next to him at the start of your turn. And I found this out from bitter experience, so it is probably very lucky that this is turn 9 and I therefore have the turn 10 save file available before he did that. So I could easily reset over it without losing much progress. Overall, Pratten isn't all that much of a threat, and it's probably best to finish the map without killing him off, because he's fairly difficult to kill because, again, of shield there, but his AI and skills are just really funny. Another AI quirk that I'm kind of glad of is that Vester in this map consistently moves near the end of the turn, and that allowed him to make advances on the turn that we broke down the strong gate. However, this does also mean that we are going to have to sit through almost the entirety of the last turn before Vester moves in to talk to Alvina. So step 1 is evacuate Reese so he doesn't get pulverized. Next up, we're going to see the green units. They still want to kill gates rather than trying to fight the enemies, so they're going to be pretty useless for the rest of this map. Then we also need to deal with the Overwatch Archer who's standing right next to Alvina, because the last thing that we want is for him to interrupt Vester trying to talk to her. And Percival is obviously very reliable at this. He gets both the Overwatch round and a second round to try and chip him down. And then Laurentia moves in to try, but she fails to do so. Where she cantos back to though is important. She sits in the one space wide choke point, This does not prevent anyone from moving around, but this is one of the 2 places where Pratton would be able to move to completely block Vester off on an upcoming turn. And while Pratton may be able to move through flying units, he cannot wait in the same space as a flying unit. So this just helps to make the random movement in the last turn a bit more reliable. Kramer finally moves down to the house that he needs to visit, and he gets a round of combat against the Chukonu, which he manages to survive thanks to Arrowbane. Unfortunately, he misses his Levin Sword hit. If he had hit that, instead of investigating, I would have had him finish off the Chukonu enemy with Balmung, and then he would be able to do the investigation on the last turn. But as it is, I decided to do this instead. And yeah, he has 48 hit. That's not ideal, and the Balmung would have been much better, but I do need to keep the Levin Sword equipped in case he needs to counter slice against the Chukonu enemy on turn 11 as well. And it worked out alright in the end. Pratton attacks Ruby here, and you can see that he does choose to activate Mercy, so there's absolutely no way for Ruby to die here. Unfortunately, the same is not true of her horse, which ends up turning into a corpse here. That's very sad, but we'll deal with it. So Vester moves up close enough to talk to Alvina on the next turn, but he stops long enough to break down the final gate, which I think is great because there were 4 gates with 100 HP each on this map, but we still managed to kill all 4 of them while still rushing the objective at a fairly fast pace. Ruby backs well away from Pratton's range. I know he generally uses Mercy now, but I absolutely do not want to take that risk. And so instead some green units are going to move in and take up those spaces and keep Ruby absolutely completely safe. And with that said, this map is now basically over. There is no possible way for the enemies to move in a way that blocks Vester from reaching Alvina now. So the map is won, and pretty much all I have to do on this final turn is spam wait. In fact, I nearly decided to click end turn just to speed it up and make it so only the green units needed to act, but I'm glad I didn't, and the reason I didn't is that I wasn't sure whether that would then count as an extra turn being taken on this map, because that I really did not want. Now, one of the green units actually moved in and attacked the Chukonu gunner next to Kramer, and that allows me to have Kramer finish him off for some experience, which I think is a nice crown on an otherwise very rough map. Pratton uses his Vulnerary instead of attacking a green unit, which saves their lives, and then Vester finally decides to move in, talks to Alvina, and that completes this map in 11 turns. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.